Well, hey, everybody, how are you doing today? It's such a pleasure to be with you online as we continue in a series that we kicked off last week as we started really celebrating 10 years of ministry at Vortex. And I was thinking really about where we are and how much has changed in 10 years. Often we don't even think about where we've come from and where we're going. We really just think about where we are, but so much about where we stand today is informed by what has happened before us. I was thinking uniquely about some of the struggles that we've had. Things that we've been through, things that have went on around us culturally, even ideas that many of us would say are coming very strongly against the faith that we love so much. They're really born out of a history. I was just remembering, the scientific revolution changed the way that we understand the world. It changed the posture of culture. We no longer thought that just these ancient texts and the clergy and the priests, they all knew what was right, because now, because of experiments, we saw that the earth was not the center of the universe, that the sun was really the center of our solar system. And it ushered in, beginning with the work of Sir Francis Bacon in 1685, it ushered in what became known as the Age of Enlightenment, a period of time for hundreds of years where human beings learned more about this world and our existence and ourselves in the cosmos than we'd ever imagined. Stepping out of what would be considered antiquity and into a modern age. And as modernism emerged, we begin to think, okay, if there's a problem, we can solve it. And we can solve it by experimenting and researching. And if there's a problem, there's got to be an answer to it. And so we did experiments, and we came up with answers, and we did research, and we came up with answers, but there was a problem that was emerging that has heavily informed the way that we understand the world today. And that's that many people tried to answer questions, and they did their research, but they came up with different answers. And so a philosophy emerged out of modernism. Modernism saying we can know the truth, we can experiment, we can find the truth. There was something called postmodernism that began to emerge. I like what Dr. Jordan Peterson said about this. He said, I understand the problem of postmodernism, that there are innumerable possible interpretations for every phenomenon and every text. But the postmodern answer to the problem is inaccurate. What is the postmodern answer? There is no truth. There is only my truth. There are no such thing as absolutes. There's no order. Everything is subjective. Everything. And so when we think about the stuff that we see in tension in our day and age, if you take a step back and understand where you came from and how we got to now, you can see that there's some problems coming. No absolute truth. Everything is subjective. It's no longer the truth. It's my truth. And postmodern thought infected everything. Philosophy, academics, even architecture. This is a picture of the Wexner Center for Arts on the campus of Ohio State University. It's considered to be the first postmodern building ever built. Peter Eisenman, an architect who had many different ideas about the way buildings could be built that was so different than modern architecture. Modern architecture, there's a rhyme, there's a reason, things are done with symmetry. And so in this building, the walls are not parallel. There are beams that go who knows where, stairs that go nowhere, doors that don't even open. There's a famous story about this building. A theologian was showing up for a debate. It's going to be one of those classic Christians versus atheists debates on the campus of Ohio State University. And when the taxi pulled up to drop him off, the taxi driver said, "Did you know this was the first postmodern building ever built? The walls are not in symmetry. There's so much that was rethought about the way you can build a building when they built that building." And the theologian looked at the taxi driver and said, "Well, I hope they didn't mess with the foundation." You know why? Foundations matter. There are a lot of ideas that are floating around in our world right now. Ideas about what is true, what is right, how to live your life. And the ideas you knowingly or unknowingly accept create your foundation. Some of us have unknowingly accepted some lies from the enemy. And we've built our life on top of a lie. I was thinking about foundations, just some observations about where we are today. Some of us are unaware of our foundations. We don't even know about them. We don't even know why we think what we think. We've never taken a step back to understand this is my worldview. This is how I see the world. This is the way that I understand what is true. When it comes to that simple argument, is truth absolute or is it relative? Many of us are living from a perspective we don't even understand. We'll say things like, "Well, that must be your truth," but we don't understand what that means. We've built lives on perspectives and precepts that in some way we just absorbed from somebody else. We don't even understand them. But then others of us have cracked, damaged, or neglected foundations. You know, a few years ago, we were looking at buying a house. And you'd go in, and one of the very first things you need to do is to look at the foundation. Because if the foundation is not good, the building is not good. For some of us, that's where our lives are. It was strong, but now it's not. There were things that were going good, but you walked away. Maybe you stopped doing what you knew was right. I'm going to give you a simple example of how some of us have experienced a broken and damaged foundation. It was good, but now it's not. See, the thing is when two people meet each other and they start dating and they fall in love, you're doing so much work through that season of your life getting to know somebody. That's why you go out on dates. That's why you can't wait to spend time with them. Why? Because there's a relationship that's emerging and it's fun and it's exciting. But you come to a point when you're like, I'm kind of at a point where I feel like I know them. You're married and you stop going out on dates and you stop having conversations and you start just doing life and doing stuff. And the foundation that you'd built, it's there and it's still holding up, but over time it gets damaged. It becomes difficult. Maybe you're raising kids and the kids move out and one day you're sitting across the table and you're looking at somebody going, I don't even know you anymore. Why? Because the foundation is damaged. What you did to start out with, you did not continue to do. And that neglected foundation began to fall apart. I've come to see this about foundations too. Some of our foundations are too small for the life we're trying to build. The truth is that we haven't built on enough. We might have some things that really are good, but the way that we've begun to embody them and live in them, it's too small to build the grand kind of life that we're trying to build. I think some of the worst things that can happen is that our lives can get so big before we're able to hold the weight of it. In a world that's so concerned about influence, some of us, if you look around the world, this story comes out over and over again. Those who gain recognition and influence before they're able to carry the weight of it. Can the integrity of your soul support the weight of your life? Because some of us are trying to build a big life, but our foundation is small. So what is a foundation? I mean, obviously for a structure, for a house, for a building, the foundation is everything. It's what everything is built into and on top of. If the foundation is bad, the structure is bad. And that's what it is for our life. It's what our lives are built into and on top of. Our foundations are, I'm going to give you two things. Number one, they are the perspectives on which we stand. They're the way we see the world. Perspectives. Everybody sees the world a certain way. And we do that based on our experiences and our understanding. And that does help to craft and form a foundation. But that's not all that we need. Our foundations are also the principles by which we live. There are perspectives and there are principles, the guiding truths that help us understand how to live. Now think about this. Perspectives, how I see it. This is why postmodernism is a half answer. It's not the full answer. It's not the right foundation because all it is just a perspective. When we say that's my truth, no, it's not. It's your perspective. It's how you see it because I don't know about you, but sometimes my perspective has been off. Have you ever seen something incorrectly? Yeah. That's everybody in here. That's every person that is watching this right now. Every person has seen something incorrectly. And if that's the truth, why would you stand solely on your perspective? Why would the foundation of your life be only what you understand and what you see and what you agree with? If your understanding is not complete, your perspectives are flawed. If your understanding is not complete, your perspectives are flawed. You know what the truth is? That is true for every person about everything. I am not God. I do not understand everything completely. So to varying degrees, all of my perspectives are flawed. Why would I want to stand on a foundation that's just my perspectives? As a matter of fact, when you only have perspectives as your foundation and you have no principles, you will be living from a place of prideful arrogance. Some of us spend way too much time and effort and energy trying to convince people to see the world the way that we see it. When we look back over our lives, what we know is that I've not always seen the world correctly. This is why we need principles. Principles are determining truths that are outside of our perspectives, that become regulating factors in our lives. We need something from without to inform what's happening within. I need something from the outside of my perspective, my reasoning, my understanding to inform what is happening within my heart, within my mind, within my soul. For example, financial resources. If I understand financial resources just simply as an asset, that's how I look at it. This is my perspective. The principle will become, I'm going to do whatever I can do, however I need to do it to increase that asset. I will cheat. I will lie. I will do it. Why? Because the more, the better. But if, as a believer, I see the financial resources in my life, the principle becomes, the guiding principle is that this is a blessing from God that has a purpose. Everything that God gives me is a blessing. God has blessed me not just because I'm special, but because He wants to bless the world through me. That becomes the principle by which I understand and see it. This is why I'm willing to embrace a truth that would say when God blesses, I return 10%, I tithe. Why do I do that? Because that's the principle. That's how I live. I live not just my perspective. And the thing is that sometimes our perspectives will be challenged by our principles. Our principles should consistently humble our perspectives. There should be things that we see. And we go, I see that evil. I see that wrong. But the principle that I believe God is good humbles my perspective to challenge God's goodness. Because the truth is, left to myself, I will have wrong perspectives. I will even adopt wrong principles. And when I do that, I'm living on a bad foundation and I'm heading towards a disaster. In Matthew 5, 6, and 7, Jesus preaches one of the longest sermons, the longest consorted teachings that we have recorded from Him in all of antiquity, in all of the Bible. Okay? It's called the Sermon on the Mount. It's referenced in two different places, in the Gospel of Luke and in the Gospel of Matthew. Now, what you're going to find is that throughout the entire message, Jesus is confronting the people's perspectives. If you listen to Jesus, Jesus over and over again says, hey, I know y'all see it this way, that's your perspective, but here is the principle. I know you've heard it put this way, this is your perspective, but here is the principle. Let's just go through it real quick. Matthew 5, beginning in verse 21. You've heard that our ancestors were told you must not murder. 10 commandments right here. If you commit murder, you are subject to judgment. But I say, if you are even angry with someone, you are subject to judgment. You know what he's saying here? You've heard it said, this is your perspective, right? I'm not supposed to shoot anybody, stab anybody. I'm not supposed to. Jesus is saying no. Here's the principle. You hate anybody, you're already murdering them in your heart. That's the principle, right? Wrong perspective. Let me give you the principle. 5:27, look at this. You've heard the commandment that says you must not commit adultery. But I say, anyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery in his heart. What's he saying? Your perspective is that the only way you've committed adultery is if there's some kind of encounter with a woman that's not your wife. But Jesus is going, no, let me explain this. Here's the principle. If it's happened in your heart, it's already happened. That's the principle. See, he's correcting them. Actually, this is remarkably humbling as we go through this for all of us. Matthew 5, later on in that chapter, you've heard the law that says love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say love your enemies. Pray for them. This is your perspective, but I'm showing you the principle. It just keeps correcting them. Matthew 6, verse 19. Don't store up treasures here on earth where moths eat them and rust destroys them and where thieves break in and steal. Store your treasures in heaven where moths and rust cannot destroy and thieves do not break in and steal. Wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will be also. This is so important. What's he saying? Listen, I know that all of your perspectives are, I need to build a really good life for me right now on earth. I need to invest and make money. And he's saying, no, listen, there's a heavenly kingdom that awaits you. You need to be eternally invested in that kingdom. And as you do that, what will happen is actually your heart will migrate from this earth to eternity. The principle. Matthew 7, verse 12. So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets, the golden rule. Right? It's what we learned when we were growing up. Treat people the way you want to be treated. Forgive the way you want to be forgiven. Be equitable in your perspectives with each other. You ever notice that times we hold people to a higher standard than we hold ourselves? Jesus is like, no. Let's forgive freely. Let's give generously. Let's treat other people the way that we would want to be treated. Your perspective is, it's okay for me to do it, but it's not okay for them. No, here's the principle. Be equitable. He's just constantly correcting them. And as Jesus wraps up the Sermon on the Mount, he tells this story. I want to read it in its entirety. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house. Notice he built it on the rock. The rain came down. The streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall because it had its foundation. Notice that word. It had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. That's how the Sermon on the Mount ends. I want to make a few observations from this story. Number one, how we respond to what we know matters more than what we know. How we respond to what we know matters more than what we know. And that flies in the face of what some of us understand to be a mature Christian. A mature Christian is the one who knows the answers to all the questions. But that is not true. Jesus is saying, listen, they both heard. One of them began to obey. Some of us brag to other people and complain to God because we say, look at all the good things that I did, God. Look at all the good things that I did. Why are you letting this happen? Why are you disciplining me here? Why aren't you doing this? Which matters more? The good things that you try to do or obedience? In 1 Samuel 15, King Saul thought he would try to do a good thing by offering a sacrifice that he wasn't supposed to, and God had clearly told him not to do. And when Samuel showed up, Samuel, after watching King Saul do something that he thought was good, but God had said not to do, he looks and he says this, God doesn't want your sacrifices. He wants you to obey Him. And that's exactly what God wants today. God wants us to obey Him. Obedience matters. Obedience is our capacity to remain faithful even when it doesn't make sense and it's difficult and challenging. As a matter of fact, in many ways, it's cultivating this discipline of obedience and faithfulness. And we don't like that word, discipline. Because discipline is innately painful. But do you know what the early followers of Jesus Christ were called? They were called disciples. Why? Because they put into practice the teachings of Jesus. They disciplined themselves. Discipline will take you places motivation and giftedness cannot. And some of us need to cultivate greater levels of obedience to what we already know. I don't need to know anything new. I don't need to be entertained. I just need to obey what God has already commanded me to do. But then I want you to notice something else that Jesus says. He talks about putting His teachings into practice. Number 2, practice matters more than performance. Practice matters more than performance. I used to coach high school football. And football is a unique sport because there's a lot of practices and not as many games. If you coach basketball, there are lots of games. If you coach baseball, there are more games. But football, only 10, maybe 11. You might get in the playoffs and play 12 or 13. But you have a lot of practices in between there. And there's a tendency to think, okay, Monday through Thursday as we practice, we are getting ready for the performance on a Saturday night. But a good coach knows that even the game is practice for the next game. We're always practicing. See, the problem with performance is that we actually embrace this pressure that I've got to get it right. I've got to be so impressive. And if I'm not, then everything is ruined because I blew my chance. But practice sees everything. Everything, every day is an opportunity to wake up, grow, and learn. You went out on a date with your wife and it didn't go well. What'd you learn? It was practice for the next time. Well, you didn't have that work out when you were trying to teach your kids. It's just practice for the next time. Practice, practice, practice. Some of us are performing, and every day we wake up and we think, I got to look a certain way. I've got to be a certain way. I've got to get it right. And if I don't impress people, my life is over. Listen to the text. Jesus said, if you hear these words of mine and put them into practice. Notice what he said. You're putting his words, his teachings into practice. Everyone is learning from someone. Who are you learning from? Is it an influencer on social media? Is it your mama or your daddy? Is it your grandma? Is it a neighbor? Is it a mentor? Because ultimately, when Jesus is talking about building a foundation, we're supposed to be learning from Him. Putting His teaching into practice. It's work. It takes effort. And one of the things I noticed about this story is number 3. Everyone works to build their lives. But some lives, even after all the work, will collapse. Everyone works. Did you notice that about the story? That both builders built a house. Every day, life is going to require effort. Every person that's watching this right now, you woke up. You woke up yesterday and you got dressed and you probably got some food. And if you've got some kids, you took care of them. You might have cleaned the house. You might have done some laundry. You might have cut some grass. You might have went on a trip. There was effort in the day. Life is going to every day require effort. And if you work at the wrong things, your life is going to come crashing down. If you consistently put work in trying to control everything, but you're not surrendered to Jesus, your life is going to come crashing down. If you think God owes you something better than what you have right now, you're entitled. Your life is going to come crashing down. If you deny the teachings of Jesus and you refuse Him the opportunity to influence and lead your life is going to come crashing down. Because there's something that's going to come about in all of our lives that will test what we've built. Number 4, we will all be forced to weather storms. There's a storm coming. I don't mean to be the bearer of bad news, but Jesus told this story on purpose. It's not a matter of if a storm comes. It's really a matter of when. Problems and pain are not avoidable. Some of us, if we're honest, the way we live our life is trying to navigate it by, I will experience the least amount of pain by going, problems and pain are coming. They are in many ways inevitable. Jesus said this in John 16, while you are in the world, you will have to suffer. You will. It's coming. Pain is a part of the process. And in this parable, Jesus equates our problems and our pains with storms. With storms. I don't know about you, but I like a good thunderstorm. I'll sit out on the front porch and watch it roll through. But my kids get upset. I've been through enough storms that I know everything's going to be okay. But they haven't yet. There's different kinds of storms that we go through in life. There's storms, just like storms that we experience in our weather patterns. They're forecasted storms. Some of you can forecast a storm that's coming in your life. You're living in such a way that you are inviting the discipline of God to correct you. You're rebelling against your parents. You're cheating at your job. You're failing your family. You're living in such a way that's inviting the discipline of God. You can forecast a storm is coming. For some of us, just like weather patterns, there might not be a front that is coming through, but we know that the conditions are favorable for a storm. Maybe you've been hanging out with the wrong people. You've got some friends that are consistently encouraging you to walk away from the principles that you know God is calling you to build your life on. You've been doing things that you feel convicted by. God's voice inside you, the Holy Spirit, says no, but you listen to your flesh that says yes. The conditions are favorable for a storm. You know, sometimes storms happen just simply because there are external factors that affect the position that we're in. You know, there's a thing called the jet stream. It's an upper level stream of wind that flows over North America. And it actually is a big part of how weather moves throughout our country. But every once in a while, there'll be these changes in the jet stream. One of those is called an El Nino. And out of nowhere, just because of external factors, you will be suffering under a storm. I want you to hear this. Some of the storms that you go through will have nothing to do with you. I can't count the times that I've sat down with people and we've talked about stuff that happened in their family when they were growing up. I mean, just seeing people crumble, weep, cry, because of the pain associated with something that they had no control over. There are storms that we'll go through that don't happen because we uniquely deserve them. It's really from external factors in our lives. It's other people and other things. There's some storms are mild. The wind is blowing a little bit. It's a little bit of rain. But the sun's still shining. It's as if God's letting us know this is a warning. You know what it is. Get it right. It's not going to be too bad this time, but if you don't take care of this, there's a severe storm coming. That's what Jesus talks about in this parable. The rain came, the winds blew violently, there was a flood, and it challenged the structure of what was built. And one of the houses crashed down because it was not built on the right foundation. Now, I want you to also hear this, that at times we'll experience the perfect storm. You have an enemy that knows your weaknesses. And just like a good battle plan will sometimes converge all at once, many different attacks converging at one time, there will be times in our lives that the enemy will attack all of our weaknesses at once. A perfect storm. We're all going to face storms. The question is not if we will, but when. And as we face these storms, the most important question will be, will what you've built be strong enough to last the coming storm? Here's why that is so important. God has already given you a playbook. He shows us right here at the end of the Sermon on the Mount. Look at what Jesus said. Everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock, who hears his teaching, puts them into practice. Built on a rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, the wind blew and beat against the house, yet it did not fall because its foundation was on the rock. You're going to do the work of building a life. I don't want you to waste your life building something that comes crashing down. You know that building that I mentioned earlier, the Wexner Center for Arts on the campus of Ohio State? 3 years after it opened, it had to be shut down. It took 5 years to repair the roof, to repair the foundation, because the principles by which it was built were flawed. When you listen to the end of the Sermon on the Mount, it's as if Jesus is pleading for us to build a stronger foundation. It's as if He's looking at you today. Build your life on me, on Jesus. He won't fail you. He won't fail you. Can we pray together? God, thank you. Thank you for this moment that we have together. I pray for everyone that's listening right now. God, would you help us to see if or if not our lives are built on the truth. Our lives are built on the solid rock of Jesus Christ. Are we living not just in the truth as in some mental ascension saying, yes, I believe that. Are we putting into practice the truth that was delivered into our hearts through Jesus Christ? Help us to see if or if not we are. And God, help us to take a step forward in our faith journey today.